domestic politics for a second. Now, if Hillary Clinton wins the Democratic nomination, and then you have a monster on the other side, Trump, Cruz, whoever it might be. I don't know that there is a non-monster on the other side. Maybe Kasich, like a bad guy, and I disagree with his policies, but not a monster. But okay, let's say it's Trump. You know that the most common criticism you're going to get is, oh no, we can't have it be Trump, and you're going to help him if you take votes away from the Democratic candidate. How do you handle that criticism?
You know, it's important to look at the track record of Barack Obama. You know, and Hillary Clinton is a monster compared to Barack Obama. But even under Obama, we had policies that make George Bush look like a wimp on practically every count, whether you look at the massive expansion of these wars, the surge into Afghanistan and Libya and Yemen and the drone wars going all over the Middle East and now into Africa. If you look at the demonization of immigrants, you know, the Republicans are the party of hate and fear-mongering, but the Democrats are the party of deportations and detentions, and more immigrants deported under Obama than under, you know, practically the other presidents combined. The oppression of the press, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the corporate trade deals that are sending our jobs overseas, the bailouts for Wall Street. Under Bush, it was like 700 billion. Under Obama, it's 17 trillion and counting. So, you know, the propaganda by the Democrats is one thing, and Obama is a gracious personality. You know, he's got a nice smile and a very nice way of speaking, but if you dig into what he's actually done, it's pretty horrible. And the resistance melts down because he's a Democrat, and people are told not to make it harder for him. You know, but in fact, the movement collapses. The social movements collapse under a Democrat. So you got to point out to people what the track record is, and that the lesser evil has just proven itself to be a conduit to the greater evil. And we have to stand up. You know, we need to get a spine and to stand up for what it is that we deserve, because neither of the corporate parties are going to give it to us. We're going to have to stand up and fight for it. And yeah, it's not going to be easy, and there may be some tough times ahead, but that's going to happen whether it's a Democrat or a Republican in office. The biggest problem is that about half of people are not bothering to come out to vote, because the Democrats wind up being just a shade less predatory than the Republicans. So young people aren't coming out to vote, and Latinos aren't voting. You know, if you put together simply a coalition of young people who are in debt, that's 40 million right there, and 16 million Latinos who vote, not to mention the 12 million who are at risk for deportation under Democrats, you know, you have a winning coalition. In the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We need to stop believing the propaganda that we are powerless. We need to stand up with the power of our convictions, the power of our vision, and stand up and fight for it and let it generate a force that cannot be stopped.
If you had like the Koch brothers scheming, et cetera, you know what they would do if they really wanted a great plan was they would come up with a monstrous right wing that would force people into having no choice at all but to vote for the moderate alternative of the Democratic Party. And then they would say to people like you, you're not allowed in because we cannot risk the monsters winning. And so we must go with the moderate corporate position, and then in the end they get exactly what they want.
Right, but where that breaks down is when people are utterly miserable and desperate, even under the Democrat, you know, and we saw Obama basically lose Congress because he didn't stand up for what it was that he led people to believe that they would get. And it's in that way that the lesser evil paves the way to the greater evil, because it doesn't satisfy what people need. And those needs have now become so overwhelming that if you talk to young people who aren't sort of in the pocket of the Democratic Party, they're not voting. They're not voting. You know, and by not voting, we lose the most progressive constituencies, and the Republicans will win every time. So, you know, I think people are desperate enough right now that they're really longing to hear other strategies. They're longing to hear other ways to put this together. And in my view, bring it on, whether it's Trump or Kasich or Bush, or whether they do a brokered convention and bring back Romney, which is highly likely to happen if it looks like Trump is going to prevail, because the Republicans know that while Trump has some support within the Republicans, he has enormous negatives, even within the Republican Party, and even bigger outside of the Republican. So he's a losing candidate. He's a losing enough candidate that people have every reason to stand up and vote their values, but likely he's not going to get in anyhow.
I want to ask you, I mean, I could talk to you about policy all day long, but I want to ask you one more policy question. You mentioned Black Lives Matter earlier, and you mentioned the prisons just a second ago. So if you were president, what would you do about the issue of civil rights, prison reform, all of the protests in Ferguson and also all those other places? So there's a lot of piecemeal solutions that are being offered. What would be, I don't know if you have a dramatic solution, what would be your solution?
Yes,
to this?
okay. So there are specific solutions to the problem of police violence. Communities should control their police and not the other way around. So we need to have fully empowered citizen review boards that do the hiring and firing, including of the police chiefs and so on. And they need to be able to get rid of abusive police. We need accountability of the police, and there should be prosecutors who are at the ready. They don't have to wait to be appointed in special cases. They should be ready to go so that police and all deaths and significant injuries that happen inside police custody should be investigated. So we can start having accountability. But you're right, the problem is much bigger and much deeper. So we can address the acute issue of police violence through those two means. But we also need to address racist violence in its many forms, including economic violence and school segregation, which becomes school violence and the school to prison pipeline. We need to have integrated schools. We need to have fully funded schools. We need to end the privatization of our schools and the attack on teachers' unions. We need to have really good quality schools that are not teaching to the test, which is very destructive, especially for challenged learners. We need to have a right to a job, and this gets back to our Green New Deal, which is sort of the basis of my campaign, that people have a right to a job at a living wage, and a job which is healthy for your community. If we are providing jobs and hope and good education and health care, because right now, if you're African American and you don't have access to a good school nor to good health care, and you get all the toxic stuff dumped on your community for being black, you lose 14 years off the average African American life in conjunction with poor education. 14 years.
Tell me again why you would lose 14 years.
So it's 7 years just for being African American. That's the loss of lifespan just for being black.
On average.
On average.
Because of all the different socioeconomic conditions, et cetera.
Well, even when they do these studies and control for the socioeconomics, they find that just being black brings a 7-year loss of lifespan. And
so is there anything we can do about that?
Oh, absolutely, yes. But let me just add to that. That's then compounded by the loss of life from having poor education. So it's 7 years of poor education, which most African Americans have to contend with, on top of 7 years being lost for being black. So that's 14 years off the average life of an African American that hasn't had access to a good school system. Yes, there's lots we can do about that, simply by providing good jobs, as well as by providing good health care, quality food, getting rid of the pollution, which falls hardest, environmental racism, which falls hardest on African American communities. All these are factors that add up and take years off the lives of this is genocidal.
So, Dr. Stein, obviously we don't have money for food in America. We got to go conduct wars.
Yeah, exactly,
sounds crazy.
Exactly.
And you're not allowed to talk about economic violence or state violence. Those are not allowed in mainstream media. So, okay, now, finally, I want to get back to what I normally do in interviews and what I promised in the beginning, and talk about you just for a second. How in the world did you get into politics? Why did you get into politics? You were a doctor, so what happened?
In short, I got tricked, but there I was in the clinic, and also the mother of young kids at that time, and looking at this epidemic in our communities of asthma and cancer and learning disabilities and Alzheimer's disease and obesity and diabetes. And I said to myself, yikes, we didn't have this in my generation growing up. Now all these kids have it. And, you know, and it didn't feel so good to me to just be throwing pills at people and then pushing them back out to the things that were making them sick. So I became involved with communities. I was recruited to help, you know, be the doc to go explain to boards of health or to the legislature why we shouldn't build that incinerator that was polluting the fish supply, or, you know, why we should clean up the coal plants that's giving us the asthma and the cancers, et cetera. And I began doing that and working in coalitions with communities and finding that when we worked together, we could actually get things done. And
was that empowering? Did you get things done on the local level, and that
on the local and the state level until we hit a wall, and we hit that wall at the end of the 1990s, and it was just part of that political transition we were going through at that time. The Democrats used to be our friend, and then they weren't our friend anymore, and you know they were installing the likes of Deval Patrick, you know, in my state, who was very much like you know, Barack Obama, progressive social agenda, but economically, you know, kind of indistinguishable from a Republican.
You know, the thing that I notice when Democrats nominate Supreme Court justices, and that's the number one reason they give for, hey, don't support Green Party, don't support progressives, don't support that, because we need Democrats to nominate Supreme Court justices. But if you notice with Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, the first thing they say is, don't worry, the justices are pro-business. And I'm like, no, but that's what I was worried about. I'm not anti-business. We run a business here. But when pro-business actually means pro-giant corporations,
yes.
and the Roberts Court, even with the 4 liberal justices on there, and they are liberal in a lot of ways, but it is the most pro-corporate Supreme Court in United States history. They have voted with the Chamber of Commerce more often than any other in history.
Yes, exactly. And when people say, well, what about the Supreme Court? You know, one of the answers to that is, well, how about the climate crisis? You know, because the Democrats and the Republicans are not going to do what it takes to fix it, you know, which means really standing up to fossil fuels and, you know, and creating an emergency plan, which they are not doing. But to your question about, you know, sort of the progression here, I just wanted to mention that when we got together in my state, in my home state in Massachusetts, we said, okay, so let's get the money out of politics. Let's fix this.
Here.
And we passed, by voter referendum, because the legislature wouldn't touch it, we passed campaign finance reform, working together across many issue areas. We passed it, and the legislature, which was 85% Democratic, repealed it on a voice vote.
Right.
And to me, that said, okay, this is not going to get fixed inside the Democratic Party. And around then, I got recruited by the Green Party to just do what I was doing. I said, run for office? Are you kidding? I had nothing to do with any political parties until I was the young age of 50 years old. It took me it was that much desperation. And what I said when I was asked to run for office was, well, nothing else is working, you know, might as well try that. And it was really out of desperation. But I found once I started running for office, where you're kind of you're kind of like public property, you go where you're told and you talk to everybody. I discovered, my God, there's this incredible, you know, pent up hunger for a genuine process here, and that people do not trust the establishment political parties. And people may not have the time to research these things, but they can smell a rat. They know if you're a rat, they know if you're on the corporate payroll, and they know when you're not. And I found that among the people I could talk to, whether they were on the right or the left, they just really respected that there was someone out there who was not on the corporate take. And that just, I felt like, oh my God, this is so different from how politics is built, that it really can be done in a way that has integrity and that really lifts up the voices of everyday people and provides the solutions that people are clamoring for.
So on that note, though, finally, I'd ask about, as you're in this long fight, how do you not get discouraged? So obviously, look, 450,000 votes is nothing to sneeze at, and it's the most votes a female's ever gotten for president. And but at the same time, obviously, it's a small percentage, obviously, right? and the Green Party, the progressive movement, isn't flowering with victory at this point. So as you fought, and you said the losses began in the 1990s when you realized you'd lost the Democratic Party, even in the state of Massachusetts. How do you fight through all of those challenges?
Well, number one, it's knowing that there is no alternative here, because otherwise our jobs are all gone. The climate is coming down, is crashing on our heads, and you have an entire generation of young people who are locked in debt. And, African Americans who cannot walk down the street, without taking their life in their hands. So, to my mind, we have no alternative but to stand up and fight. We are in that corner right now, or at the edge of the cliff, and we're going over the cliff, or we're going to stand here and fight. And, and the choice is pretty clear when it comes down to that. But, it's more than that. It's knowing that there are so many ways that this house of cards is falling down right now. This is like a house that's been completely eaten from the inside by termites, and it's just a little puff of wind, and it's going to come down. You don't know exactly when or which crisis it is that's going to bring it down, but the system is going to implode. And there are so many ways that that can happen. It's waiting to happen. It could be tomorrow for all we know. And there are so many ways that we as people can rise up and take control democratically. And the one that I keep pointing to, because it's important to know, this isn't like theoretical. This could happen right now. Tell your friends who are in debt. They can come out to the election in November of 2016 and cancel their debt. If 40 million people get word that they can come out and cancel their debt, they're going to do it. I have yet to find the young person in debt who hears that they have an option to support a candidate that will cancel it. I have yet to find the young person who doesn't become a missionary for the campaign.
It's interesting. You give an answer that's very similar to the other presidential candidate that I interviewed while he was in the race, which is Professor Larry Lessig. And his answer was, what's the alternative? You lie down and take it?
Yeah.
Right? So exactly. There are warriors fighting for the right causes, all in your own ways. And it's a pleasure to talk to you guys about it. And you're not alone in thinking that the consequences might be catastrophic. So I just watched the movie The Big Short. I'd already read the book that was about the economic collapse and four groups of people who realized that it was coming. Now, they profited off of it, and they bet against the housing market, but they're smart guys, and they were right, and they were generally distrustful of Wall Street and the corporate issues. One of them, the one who was most right and the one that was first to realize the problem, at the end of the movie, which was not in the book, and the movie's just coming out now, it says he's now investing only in water. And so what that means, and I've heard Dylan Ratigan talk about the wealthiest people in the world are now mainly investing in farmlands. So that means that there are some people with money and deep knowledge who think, just like you do, it's coming.
That's right. And what they don't know is that it will come in many ways, many of which are unpredictable. So you cannot protect yourself from what's going to happen, except through a collective solution. We need to create a world that's going to work for all of us, or it's going to work for none of us.
All right, Dr. Jill Stein, running for the presidency under the Green Party. Thank you so much for joining us on the Young Turks. Really appreciate it.
Great.